in New York State, 1922, and 23 in the United States State Park in what is now Bear Mountain State Park. It was not until 1937, however, that the trail was finally completed, and the last few miles were opened in Maine on August 15th of that year. Much of it was built by volunteers and some by the CCC. A lot of you would remember the CCC, but many of you may be too young to know about it. But that was the Civilian Conservation Corps that Roosevelt started to help get out of the Depression. In 1968, the National Trail Systems Act was passed, and the AT was made a linear national park. During its traverse from Springer Mountain, Georgia to Mount Katahdin in Maine, the trail passes through 14 states, 6 national parks, 8 national forests, about 60 state parks or game lands, and no private land. It is the longest hiking trail, hiking path in the world. Although it goes around or by most towns, there are a few which it passes directly through, such as Damascus, Virginia, which is known as the friendliest town on the trail. It is primarily maintained by volunteers from the 33 member clubs of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, which in conjunction with the National Park Service oversees the management of the trail. This is a unique arrangement of the government working with a citizens group. The highest point on the trail is Clingman's Dome in the Smokies at 6,643 feet. The lowest point is crossing over the Hudson River on the Bear Mountain Bridge at about 176 feet. The southern terminus, Springer Mountain, is at an elevation of 3,762 feet, and the northern terminus, Mount Katahdin, is at an elevation of 5,267 feet. The total length of the trail today is about 2,200 miles. This has changed from the 2,160.2 when we finished because of various relocations. Today, as many as 2,000 to 3,000 hikers, and maybe even more than that now, will start from Springer Mountain each year, and with the intent of hiking the entire length, but only a few hundred of them will actually complete it. A much smaller number will start at Mount Katahdin in Maine and head south. There's a good reason for that. People go south in the spring because they don't know what black flies are down there. There are also some like us who will hike it in sections over a period of several years. When we were in the Smokies, we met a man who had done about 100 miles a year for 20 years and was nearly finished. Others have taken even longer. For us, it was actually 8 years, although we had done 63.4 miles before we started working on it. This had been done during the course of climbing the 111 high peaks over 4,000 feet in the Northeast. That number actually is 115 at this point, but it was, when we did it, it was 113, but it's still called the 111ers. Our quest began in earnest in 1990 when we had both retired and had the time to plan an extensive trip. During our first year, we actually hiked about 238 miles. Our biggest year, 1994, when we did 389 miles, including the 800-mile wilderness. Our smallest year was 93 rather, when we only did 151 miles. We did a lot of driving and had the help of many friends, trail angels, and hired drivers. Our longest backpacking day was 18.3 miles. Our shortest day was 0.8 miles. And believe me, every tenth counts, which is why I always give the tenths. Our longest continuous backpack was 15 days, during which time we hiked 103.7 miles and 7 access miles for a total of 110.7 miles, followed by 1 day of slack packing, 9 miles with 1 access mile. And then 13 days of backpacking, another 87 miles with 2 access miles, and that was 1990, our first year. The map of the trail courtesy of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, shows you the route that it goes from Springer up to Katahdin. Here we are, ready to start.
Sorry, Millie. I don't know why it's not advancing. Give me a second here. We had this all down to a science. Let's see. There we go.
Our heads are cut off, but that's okay. Okay, we're ready to go. And this shows our packs. Next picture. Okay, there are packs. Clark's weighed about 50 pounds and mine weighed about 40. Next. This is a plaque indicating the start of the trail. Blue and white blazes next. Next. Okay. Blue blazes. Oh, go back. Go back. Okay. Blue blazes. Next.
This one?
That one. That, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, blue blazes. You see two of them here and one white blaze. The blue blazes mark the access trails and the white blazes mark the trail. Okay, next. This is a sign for Springer Mountain. And next, the register box where we signed in to indicate when we had started. Next, Springer Mountain Shelter, our first night on the trail. And the next, many trail signs, the first of many trail signs. Next, Long Creek Falls in the Chattahoochee National Forest is one of the few waterfalls on the southern stretch of the trail. Next, looking over the mountains. Next, Slaughter Springs campsite. And that's the tent that we used when we didn't have other means of shelter. It's a Gore-Tex tent. It weighed only 3 pounds. And this is just, the campsite is, one theory says that Slaughter Springs is so named because of a battle between the Cherokee and Creek Indians when the water turned to red because of the blood. And this is said to be how Blood Mountain got its name. Next. Clark is getting dinner ready. He did all the cooking on the trail. Next. This is next to Blood Mountain Shelter, which was a stone shelter. It's a 2-room stone building, was constructed by the CCC in 1934 on the summit of 4,458-foot Blood Mountain. It's the 6th tallest mountain in Georgia and the highest point on the trail in Georgia. In January 2013, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. We were very glad that we had camped before we got there, as there was a note in the register not to kill the rats because they were needed for traffic control of the mice. The rats were said to be so huge they had 2 inches between their eyes. We did take a break there to air out our feet and study the map. Next. Next.
I don't know why it keeps freezing on me, Millie.
Well,
there we go.
It was May and the red azaleas were in full bloom, as were the orange azaleas. Another picture, next picture. Next, okay. This is the Wylesa Yee. The Wylesa Yee Center at Neels Gap was built in 1937 by the CCC. It was abandoned a couple of times, then slated for demolition in the 1970s, until some locals managed to place it on the National Register of Historic Places. It has served as a hiking outfitter and hostel since the early 1980s. This is the only place where the trail actually goes through a man-made structure. We spent the night there and were given the bridal suite. We also were able to get a good spaghetti supper and an ample breakfast before heading up on the trail. And we also did laundry and bought a good water bag. Fortunately, we did not need batteries because we were told that Grandma Turtle had purchased them all for her portable TV, if you can believe that. Later, we actually saw her sitting by the trail watching her TV. Next. Here we are right by Neels Gap. And next. Two of our two fellow hikers up at the Blue Mountain Shelter, Grandma Turtle and Cuddles, were there also. We had a delightful evening with a cozy campfire and went to bed very tired. We were so tired that we neglected to put some lunch goodies for my pack into a bear bag, and during the night 4 mice found them and I found their way in. Cuddles was so tired she didn't hear them, but fortunately they didn't get much. Everybody on the trail has a trail name. We were the Yankee Trail Plotters. Next, this is Pinnacle Knob, a much photographed spot. Next, some red flowers. Next, the North Carolina, oh, those are just some trail signs. And then we get to the North Carolina border next. That's the North Carolina border. And this is in at Fly Gap. Next is a very interesting tree. Next, the Mount Albert Fire Tower is at 5,240 feet of elevation. The original metal fire tower was built in the 50s to replace an older wooden tower on nearby standing Indian Mountain. Next, here are some hikers ready for rain. There used to be, and may still be, a shirts for sale at the AT headquarters. It's an answer shirt. And one of the questions, or one of the answers rather, is get wet. And no matter how well you are prepared for the rain, even with Gore-Tex boots, you're bound to get wet. These men were well prepared, but probably did get wet anyway. Next is a roadside chapel near Franklin, North Carolina, and also a Rainbow Springs campground where we spent a few nights. Next, one of the many balls. These are mountain summits or crests primarily covered by thick vegetation, native grasses or shrubs occurring where you would normally expect thick forest growth. Sometimes they are the result of fires. Next, Fontana Dam. This is a hydroelectric dam on the Little Tennessee River, built in the 1940s because of the high demand for electricity during World War II. 450 feet high, it is the tallest dam in the eastern United States. In 2017, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The AT crosses the dam, and at the north end is the entrance to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The park is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, standing on straddling the ridge line of the Great Mountains, which are part of the Blue Ridge Mountains, which are a division of the Appalachian mountain chain. The border between North Carolina and Tennessee runs through the park, which was chartered by Congress in 1934 and officially dedicated by President Roosevelt in 1940. It is the most visited national park in the country, partly because the US highway goes right through it. Next, this is a reverse zoo. We were in the shelter and the young deer was looking at us. Shelters in the Smokies, I think they've been removed, but they used to have chain link fences across the front to keep us in and the wildlife out. Next, one of the bears that we saw. We also saw a moose, but I didn't happen to get a picture of a moose, but we did see one when we were in the Maine wilderness. Next, inside a Smoky Mountain shelter, the bags that contain food are hung to keep them away from the mice. Next, going up the trail in the Smokies. Next, a young deer. Next, a field of lupins. Next, this was my view for a lot of the first year. Next, Klingman's Dome at 6,643 feet is the highest point on the trail and the second highest point east of the Mississippi. It is on the border of North Carolina and Tennessee. The tower is 54 feet high. On a clear day, one can see 100 miles in all directions. We were fortunate to have a relatively clear day. We did go up to the top of it, and we told people to stay away because we'd been hiking for several days when we got there. Probably didn't smell too good. Then when we came down from the tower, we went and sat on a log to eat lunch, and a woman came by and she said, "May I take your picture?" And My son can use it for show and tell at school and say that these people hiked 200 miles. Next, this is the ice water spring shelter. Notice that it is made of stone like all shelters in the park, and you can see the chimney for the fireplace. Next, up here. Next, trail sign, the Mount Collins shelter sign. Note that it is 5/10 of a mile, and that is up. Quite often after a day of hiking, the shelter will be up a short distance. Next, the Mount Cameron Fire Tower, built by the CCC in 1939 and was restored in 1994 by the Friends of the Smokies in conjunction with the ATC. Mount Cameron is, 4,958 feet in elevation. The tower is unusual in that it is built from nearby rock and timber and other materials which had to be hauled up the mountain. It was manned until the 1960s. Next, Davenport Gap Shelter, and here we're drying some wet clothes. Next, the sign at the Gap, the northern end of the trail in the Smokies. Next, Over Mountain Shelter. This is the one place where we were really uncomfortable on the trail. We got there and you could see the road down below and there were a lot of people walking around. And we just were a little bit uncomfortable because the road was so close. Fortunately, 3 other hikers came along and we were very happy to see them. And so we had our supper, and then Clark and I slept in the loft upstairs, and everything was fine until we saw some flashlights coming toward us. And there were 2 men on horseback, and this was late, we'd been asleep for a while. And these men actually rode right through the barn. One of the horses hit the side of the barn and the barn shook. And after a while, they tied their horses up outside and they put their sleeping bags right under us. We could see them through the cracks in the floorboards. And one of them said, "What time is it?" And the other said, "Well, it's 3 o'clock. And then one of them was very sick. And it was obvious that they were both pretty drunk. So anyway, we got up, we were pretty uncomfortable at that point and very glad there were 3 other hikers there with us. So we got up about 6 o'clock and just packed our packs and went down, and we decided we're just going to go on the trail a ways and eat breakfast. At that point, everybody else was up eating breakfast except the 2 men who were drinking their breakfast. One of them had a knife in his boot. So we went on, and after a while we stopped for breakfast, and the 3 hikers came along, and they said, well, there was really no danger. They had come up to the barn because there was a big barn fire on the road where they were with some of their friends, and they knew that the sheriff would come because people were reporting the fire, and there was a warrant for the arrest of one of them. He grabbed his friend and they had their sleeping bags and came up to the barn. So we were very happy that we'd gotten away. Next. This is known as Brown's Castle. It's a hostel near the trail where we spent the night with several other hikers. There's a kitchen where we were able to prepare meals. Next. This is a Grinstaff monument built by the family to honor the South Slope's famous hermit. A couple of hikers who had camped there. Next, this is the place. That's the name of it. It's a house owned by the Methodist Church, which is in front of it. And it's open. Hikers can go in there, bunks in there, and you can go in there and sleep or take showers. We happened to have our car parked there, and we slept in the car, but we did use the showers, and people generally leave a donation. And it's really very nice. And the church, sometimes there are fundraisers, the trail people have a fundraiser to raise money for it. And we actually met some other hikers who became good friends and still are. Next, some people prefer to tent. Next, this is the park in Damascus where trail days, people come from both north and south. They hitchhike to get to Damascus for trail days, which is always a fun time, about the 3rd weekend in May. And there's always an amateur night held here in the park. And there's also a backpackers parade, which we'll see shortly. Next, this is an information center in an old caboose. Next, here I am stirring apple butter. Next, here's some of the backpackers parade. Next, some hikers bring their dogs. They can't take them through the Smokies or to Baxter Park in Maine, but they can have them the rest of the way on the trail. Next, this is a chicken barbecue put on every year by the volunteer firefighters. Next, Mount Rogers Outfitters is a good store to get supplies. Next, clown in the parade. Next, and the Mountain Marching Mamas, they were doing the trail inspections. I don't recall where they were from, actually. Next, this is a 540-foot long trestle bridge on the Virginia Creeper Trail, which the AT joins for a short distance in Virginia. It is actually an old railroad bridge. Next, here's some of the wild ponies in Grayson Highlands State Park. And next, some of them joined us for breakfast. Next, here's some more ponies. Next, another nice wide wooden bridge. Next, getting dinner at a rainy campsite. Next, this is the Mount Rogers National Recreation Area headquarters where some of us camped. There happened to be a phone booth, some of us remember phone booths, on the porch of the headquarters building. So along with several others, we ordered pizza from Domino's in Athens, which was not too far away. And they delivered the pizza to us. Next, the headquarters building where we were able to use the facilities, which was very nice. Next, this is a bird in the Chatfield shelter. Next, this is the Village Motel in Athens. A lot of hikers had come there because the final showing of Cheers on TV was going to be that night. And people came to stay in the motel so they could see the TV and see Cheers. Next is the Chestnut Knob shelter. This was a former fire warden's cabin and was very damp. And as you can see, it was pretty damp everywhere at that point. Next, this is the Holy Family Hostel in Parisburg, Virginia. We never actually stayed there, but we did get rides a few times by the caretaker. Next, this is the Audie Murphy Memorial Monument to the most decorated American soldier in World War II, who became a movie actor starring in many movies. Next, this is the Woods Hole Hostel. This is the house, and there was a separate building with bunk beds for the hikers. There was also a solar shower, and breakfast was served in the house, which was very good. Next, style by a big tree. Next, one of the many road crossings. Next, flowering tree. Next, a long bridge over the stream. Next, some pink lady slipper. We were at a trail junction, I think it was in Maryland, and a young man and his girlfriend were just starting on a section of the trail, and he was bending over. He was going to pick the lady slipper, and I stopped him because they are a protected species. Next, the Dragon's Tooth is a rock monolith of Tuscarora quartzite. It straddles two counties near the town of Catawba, Virginia. It is the top of Cove Mountain. Next, this is one of the many information signs on the Blue Ridge Parkway. I'll give you a minute to look at that. Next, these are some pretty flowers. Next, how to keep warm while eating on a cold night. Next, a lacy tree on the Blue Ridge. Next, a shelter with a skylight, which is very nice. Next, an open air privy. Next, the C&C grocery store near the Blue Ridge Parkway. We were able to contract with a driver who took us to a trailhead. And what we'd do is we would leave a car at one end of a section, and he would take us to another end of this section, and we'd hike to our car. If we didn't have someone like that, Clark would drop me at one end and then drive to the other, and we would cross each other midway, and then I would drive back to the other end of the section and pick him up. But the driver we got here happened to be a geologist, and he gave us a lecture the whole way. When we asked what we owed him, he said we would have to pay him to stop talking. He had written a roadside geology of Virginia, and it was very interesting. Next, this is a strange animal in the National Zoo. The sign says trespassers will be eaten. Next, one of the many styles on the trail. Next, lots of wildlife. Cow with calf, but we had to look out for cow pies. Next, when you crossed the field, the places were just on a stick. Next, these are some trail angels. They were camped next to us in a park and insisted on giving us a ride so that we could leave the car one place of a section and they would take us to the other place so we could hike together that time. Next, this is the oldest Washington monument on South Mountain in Maryland. It was built in 1827 and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1972. Next, the field of Lupin. Next, near the halfway point. Next, field of flowers. Flowers are wonderful. We went south in the spring because, as I said earlier, they don't know what black flies are. And then we would go north in the fall, and we sort of hiked both ends toward the middle. Next, a fancy shelter. Next, with a separate dining area, and it even has a solar shower. Next. Next, this is a Pine Grove furnace built in 1764, and it ended production in 1895. Next is a close look at the furnace. Next, this is the halfway marker built by thru hiker Woodchuck. He was a thru hiker in 1985, and we actually met him. Yeah, he hiked the trail a number of times. Next, a rest stop by a bridge. Next, a mailbox for Yellow Spring Village in St. Anthony's Wilderness. This was originally coal mines. When the mines were exhausted, the village and others around the area were abandoned. The land was stripped of all timber and scarred by mines, but with nature and conservation efforts, the land has been restored. Next, a lunch stop in St. Anthony's Wilderness. Next, Pennsylvania Rocks. The story is that the trail maintainers in Pennsylvania turn the rocks on the side and sharpen them. They are very sharp and you have to be careful. And I actually did get a bad cut on one of them. Next, more rocks. Next, box turtle. We saw quite a few turtles actually. Next, lunch on the rocks. More rocks. And the Lehigh River Valley. Next, Clark preaching from Pulpit Rock, property of Blue Point. Next, these are some observatories above Pulpit Rock, manned by the Lehigh Valley Amateur Astronomical Association. Next, the I-80 bridge. Next, we actually had to cross on the I-80 bridge. Every time a truck went by, the bridge shook. Next, this is a sign for Sunfish Pond, a registered national landmark. Next, Stonehenge at the pond. Next. The New York, New Jersey line. We had friends who helped us finish New Jersey. Next. Stone Shelter in Harriman State Park. Next. A lunch break. Next. As you can see, my husband was a real swinger. Next. He passed. Next. A pretty pond. Next. The lemon squeezer in Harriman State Park. Next. He made it through. I don't have any pictures of the Mahoosuc Notch, which is a very difficult place to get through, and they're great rocks the size of houses, and really, it's a really challenging place. I'm sorry I don't have some pictures of it. Next. Another shelter in Harriman State Park. Next. Perkins Memorial Tower on top of Bear Mountain, 40 feet high and on the highest point in the park, in memory of George Walbridge Perkins, who served for many years on the Palisades Interstate Park Commission. Next. Looking down at the Hudson River. Next. Bear Mountain Bridge, the lowest point on the trail. Next. The Connecticut State Line. Next. This is an iron bridge which was built in 1903 over the Housatonic River. Next. A nice footbridge. Next. A more challenging bridge. Next. Still more challenging. Next. The Goddard Shelter on Glastonbury Mountain in Vermont. Next. One of the hikers took a short nap on the way down the mountain. She may recognize herself in that picture. Next, some places have steps. Next, a beautiful view. Next, we're ready to climb Bromley Mountain. Next, cows in a pasture, and of course we had to watch out for cow pies. Next, this is Dizzy B. She was a trail angel. She would take her car every night after she was through work. She'd go up to a trail crossing on the road and bring drinks for all the hikers. And sometimes she would drive them places. And one day she drove us to drove Clark to a trailhead, excuse me, and then brought him back so that we could walk to that section of the trail together. Next, a field of trillium. Next, a fancy privy. Next, lunch with a view. Next, a well-ventilated outhouse. Next, a break by a bridge. Next, more trillium. We saw a lot of trillium. Next, flowering trees.
Sorry.
Another long bridge. Next, a ladder to a falls. And next, these are the falls on Mount Moosilauke. Next, top of the falls. Next, a summit cairn. Next, an open summit ridge. Next, nap at lunchtime. A couple of hikers that hiked with some. Next, Gentian Pond Shelter. Next, another ladder. Next, the Saddleback Summit in Maine. Next, Flagstaff Lake. Next, geese on Flagstaff Lake. Next, holding on a windy summit on Avery Peak. Next, this is a wire bridge, one of the oldest American suspension bridges to retain most of its original components. It's in North Portland, Maine. It was built in the 1800s. Next, to get across the Kennebec River, you have to take a ferry. That's the ferry. And you had to help with the paddling. And obviously they can only take one or two people at a time. but we had made arrangements with the owner of the service to get across. We told them approximately when we'd be there. Next, pretty pond. Next, another pretty pond. Next, filtering water. We filtered all the water that we drank, and we each carried 2 liters of water every day. Next, another shelter with skylights. Next, this is a tooth fungus. I think I talked with somebody who's quite knowledgeable, and she thinks it was a tooth fungus, although she said it's not clear enough to be absolutely sure. Next, and this is honey mushroom. It's a parasite on trees, both living and dead. When it's on living trees, it could do damage to them. Next, this is the Shaw's boarding house. This couple, Keith and Pat Shaw, ran this boarding house for hikers for many, many years, and we stayed there a number of times. And Keith always cooked breakfast, and he made so many pancakes, and he insisted that you eat them all. So you never left there hungry. Next, crossing a stream. Next, electro hazard warning sign. Next, a tricky crossing. Next, a view of Catania. Next, Fort Relief. This was on Lake Mary Jo Lake, and we stopped there for lunch, and some people hiked in on one of the old logging roads, which is the only way you could get into the 500-mile wilderness. And they asked if they could do anything for us. And we said, well, you could take out our garbage, because we've been hiking for 5 days at that point, and we all had garbage. So they obligingly took our garbage out, which was much appreciated. Next, while we're eating lunch, this plane landed. And when we were starting to hike again, we went around the lake to the left, and we came to a place where the trail turned to the left. And there was a very small sign up high on a tree that said beach with an arrow to the right. We all turned right and went swimming. I happened to have a bathing suit. The rest of them were in their underwear. And we got the pilot to take a picture. Unfortunately, that picture has been mislaid, or I would have it here. But anyway, we tried to get him to go to Monson and get us some ice cream, but he wouldn't do it. Next. This is the Patiwasho shelter. Obviously, this tree had come down and had done some damage to the shelter, and we had to crawl over logs to get into the shelter, and it was pretty tricky, but we had sort of some shelter. Next, this is view of Catan from the Namakanta Lake. Next, fall colors were beginning. This was September. Next, more fall colors. Next, Clark happened to have a birthday while we were in the 100-mile wilderness, and a friend and I bought a bunch of balloons. And next, he put them on his pack and carried them the rest of that trip. Next, a tricky crossing. Next, a narrow bridge. Next, there were many stream crossings in Maine. And when we had been in Damascus, we'd gotten some really lightweight sandals. They were made out of neoprene. They didn't weigh anything really. And so we used those when we were crossing the streams, and we'd carry our boots across. Next, that's some more of the honey mushroom parasite. Next, the main CCC sign, they built much of the trail, as I mentioned earlier, and this was a dedication to them. Next, coming down the trail. Next, here's the north end of the 100-mile wilderness, and tells you not to start through there unless you've got a 10 days supply of everything you might need. Next, we went actually from south to north on the 100-mile wilderness. This is the Able Bridge store, and you could get some things in there. And we stopped there. I don't remember what we bought, but we did go in and get some things, I guess. Next, This is approach to Mount Katahdin. Next, there were many rocks. Next, more rocks. Next, the summit cairn. Next, North Terminus sign with our friends who had taken those last few pictures. Next is a close-up of the sign. And then our final hike, which was in Massachusetts at Guilford Pond. And these are the people who were on the final hike with us. Next, one of our, there we are. Next, one of our friends had made that banner for us. And we had a cake next. And we celebrated with our friends with the cake next. And champagne next. And that's it.
Thank you. Whoop. Thank you very much, Millie. That was wonderful. Yes, everybody go ahead and unmute your mics and feel free to ask any questions that you would like to of Millie on her wonderful adventure. It was phenomenal.
Millie, this is Dana. I'm wondering what it's like to get, you're up there on Katahdin. I know you got to come back down again. Like, are you backtracking back down the same trail you went up? Do you take a different trail down? You know, is there any letdown at that point? Tell me about that, what it felt like.
Oh, we did come, when we were doing the trail, we went up and back on the same trail. We had also hiked it on another trail. And I think Clark had been up Katahdin 3 times and I did it twice. But we did up and back on that trail.
What does it feel like? So was that, okay, so you've done that before, but did you save that for, I mean, since you did the Appalachian Trail in pieces, did you save a Katahdin ascent for the end to make that like the, or did you not?
Fairly early on.
Okay.
Now we finished in Massachusetts at Guilford Pond so that we could have some friends with us and have a party.
Dana also put a couple other questions in the chat. I'll just go ahead and read them. Dana, you might have forgotten what you put there. What is slack packing?
Packing with a very light pack.
Okay.
And
Millie, did your feet bleed?
I'm sorry, what?
Did your feet bleed?
No. The first year we were hiking was 1990, and Bill Irwin, who was a blind man hiking the trail, had his dog with him, and he had to make special booties for his dog because the dog's feet were bleeding.
Yeah, they tell you that on the dogs.
Did you dehydrate your own food? Another question from Dana. Did you dehydrate your own food for the trip? And can you share how you planned and packed meals?
Planned the food, but we bought a lot of commercial stuff. We didn't freeze our own stuff. We have a friend who did, but we bought commercial stuff.
Millie, is the trail obvious all the way, or are you forever losing your way and having to find out the backtrack?
Very well marked, Chris.
It is, yeah.
Heath, rather. It's very well marked. The white blazes, you can see them. You can see from one blaze to the next. And if there's a turn in the trail, there would be blazes, the 2 blazes that might be offset in the direction the trail was turning.
Okay.
And interestingly, the blind man, Bill Irwin, he wrote a book about his hike, and he mentioned that he felt after a while that the dog, rather than following the scent, was following the trail markers. Head up, down.
Millie, what was the longest stretch, the most days that you spent on the trail without a stop?
Oh gosh, I think I mentioned that. I think it was about 18 days.
What was your favorite part of the trail?
Probably the main wilderness.
Now that would scare the dickens out of me. That's that 100-mile stretch where you have to, where there's nothing in between. So it doesn't frighten you.
No. Today, but it didn't then. I couldn't do it now.
Millie, I apologize for being late, but did you mention whether you saw any rattlesnakes during your hiking?
One time we were going over a bald and there was a baby rattlesnake in the trail, and Clark picked it up with his stick and threw it off the trail so it wouldn't get stepped on. And another time we were on an access trail I think in the Blue Ridge Parkway, and we saw a rattlesnake that had obviously just had a big meal because it was all curled up digesting a rabbit or something.
Hmm.
So yes, we did.
So some years ago when I was recovering from knee surgery, I took that time to read Bill Bryson's Walk in the Woods.
Oh.
It seemed like a good thing to do at that time. Anyway, I was fascinated with its description of the pass through Pennsylvania and the underground coal mine fires so you must have crossed that territory. What was it like?
Well, there's one section of Pennsylvania where the trees are all dead from the chemicals that were around, and it's sort of ghost-like. It was really weird.
Is the ground hot from the fire or not?
Fires, but just from the chemistry, from the mines and things. And hopefully by now it started to regenerate, but it was really very dead and barren looking when we went through that section.
I've never asked you this, Millie, but whose idea was it to do this adventure? Yours or Clark's, or was it a mutual decision, or how'd it go?
Clark had wanted to do it for a long time, and I just decided I didn't want him doing it alone. And as on that one picture, the first year I was following him pretty closely. His boots rather than.
Yeah.
One time the first year too, we were going through a rhododendron arch. Actually, it was quite dark, and I got really depressed. And then I told myself, well, if Bill Irwin can do it, the blind man, then I can do it. And that kept me going. That had kept me going a lot the first year.
So, Millie, do you consider this to be one of your most important accomplishments?
Oh yes, of course.
Millie, did you ever feel like giving up?
No. No, you wouldn't give up something like that. Well, some people did, but we didn't.
But what was there one part that was more challenging than another?
We couldn't hear you, Millie, for some reason.
The 100-mile wilderness was very challenging, but I loved it.
I'm next to Millie and I have a question. My question is, did you have to have anything on you for protection? Like for a rattlesnake or for anything? You didn't have anything with you in case. Okay.
I'll go.
Yeah.
Millie, nowadays there's a lot of information about where resources might be found along the trail. Did you have any indication of exactly where you could expect to find water that you could filter?
The guidebooks pretty much gave all that information. There were maps.
Well, now people would carry their own stuff.
You met a lot of people in your travels, Millie, and it seemed like it was a common bond. How many do you still keep in touch with?
Unfortunately, most of the people we kept in touch with have died.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Millie, do you have any idea about how heavy your heaviest pack was during a section of the hike?
Now, mine was 40 pounds and Clark's was 50.
Wow.
So you told us what your trail name was. Were there some favorite trail names of some other hikers that you
Well,
remember?
there was Four Eyes was one. Oh, glory. Off the top of my head, if you hadn't asked me, I could come up with some. They were all pretty original. Everybody comes up, or sometimes somebody gives you a trail name. Like there was one who was a camera freak, and her husband called her something to do with taking pictures all the time. I can't remember what it was, but yeah. But people had pretty unique names.
Did you often get to a shelter and find it was full, or did you not have any problem?
Oh, yes. We did get to shelters and found them full, and then we would tent nearby.
And there, you nor your husband were injured in any way during any of your travels?
Did we what?
Get hurt?
No. Oh, well, I got a bad cut on the Pennsylvania rocks.
And what could you do, like, as far as medical services? Did you have to just suck it up until you got to the next place?
Oh, we took care of it ourselves.
Yeah.
We never had anything so bad. Well, the first year, actually, my right knee, which I had injured in an auto accident in 1955, started bothering me in the Smokies. And Clark mentioned one time that I was limping even when I wasn't hiking, or when I didn't have a backpack on. And so we decided to get off at Newfound Gap. And then we came home, and I did some exercises on my knee for a while. And then we went north in the fall, and I was able to hike some more. But then I slipped and injured my left knee.
Oh,
so
gee.
So we got off early. Then we were in New Hampshire, and we've been through so much. And we decided to get off the trail because my knees were just hurting too much and I couldn't go up. So we started down, and we got to a side trail, and we're hoping to check to Pickham Notch. And we saw someone watering her lawn, and we asked if we could use her phone. Well, no, you're right near you're practically to the main road. You're all right. So she was no help at all. And we got out to the main road, which is Route 3. And I said a silent prayer, and I said, please get us somebody who will take us all the way to Pickham. And within seconds, somebody stopped.
Oh, nice.
Very old car. And he said, where do you want to go? And first he said, where do you want to go? He said, what time is it? We said, well, we want to go to, what's the town before Pickham Notch? And we wanted to go there so we could get a ride to, what time is it? Clark said, well, it's 3 o'clock. Oh, I'll take you all the way to Pickham.
Oh, beautiful.
Cindy, I have a question. I noticed that this is being recorded. Would the link be posted on the ECOS website?
Yes, it will, on that homepage under Zoom recordings. Yep. I should be able to get it up tomorrow.
Millie, you had some acquaintances that wanted to be here tonight that couldn't join us, so I'm delighted that it's being recorded.
Millie, can I say that you're an extraordinary woman and you are a true inspiration?
Well, people tell me that, but I don't know why.
Some of us have difficulty just walking to the mailbox, Millie.
So Millie, one more quick question. How far do you still walk on a regular basis?
I go to a gym 3 days a week, and I try to walk a couple of miles the days I don't go to the gym.
And you still ski, you told me, Millie.
I teach adaptive skiing, except I'm not this year because it's just, I double-edged trench, but it's just too restrictive. You have to wear masks inside and out and keep social distancing, and I just wasn't comfortable with that. a lot of cross country last winter, and I plan to do that this winter also.
Yeah.
She walks around our neighborhood many, many miles with her ski pole.
Yes,
Any
I'm
more-
gonna help you. Oh,
Any more
sorry,
questions? Any more
That was-
questions for
well, that-
our wonderful speaker?
Well, I would just like to say that was extraordinary, Millie, and if I could only do the same, maybe someday, but so wonderful to have you here. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Millie.
Yeah.
And you know, like I said, it is out of the box for Millie. I'm not telling stories behind her back. This was something that she wasn't sure she would be able to do because of the Zoom, but she put all of her slides onto picture format and put everything together, and all I did was make sure it all worked. And I'm just grateful that you did it and shared this experience with us, Millie. We really enjoyed it.
Well, I'm glad it went over well.
Thank you, Millie.
Thank you.
All right, well, if we don't have any more questions, I will go ahead and finish our meeting for this evening. Last call, last questions for Millie. Well, thank you all very much for joining us. Come back in February and we'll talk about birds, and enjoy the sunshine when it's here, and stay safe, and just keep smiling, everybody. It was great seeing you. Take care. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Cindy.
Goodbye. Good night.